With Doral, we have a series of magnificent buildings. We call them bungalows. They each hold from 50 to 70 very luxurious rooms with magnificent views. We have incredible conference rooms, incredible restaurants. It's very importantly only 5 minutes from the airport. The airport's right next door. And we have many hundreds of acres so that in terms of parking, in terms of all of the things that you need, the ballrooms are among the biggest in Florida and the best. Each country can have their own villa or their own bungalow.
Welcome back. President Trump really playing convention bureau chief there, pushing his Miami Golf Club as the place to host the next year's G7 summit. It's just the latest example of a long list of potential conflicts of interest facing this president without apparently any accountability. He's never relinquished control of his business empire after moving into the White House. And according to one government watchdog group, the list of conflicts is now 2,000 long and counting. And then just minutes ago, the Washington Post reported that the Attorney General, Bill Barr, has officially booked President Trump's D.C. hotel for his $30,000 holiday party. Joining me now is said reporter, David Fahrenthold. He's one of the Post reporters who just broke that news story about Bill Barr. He's been chronicling the Donald Trump business interests since before he was elected president. He's also an MSNBC contributor, and today I think he's basically a co-host of most hours. David, it's nice to see you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you had time to do some reporting in between us commandeering you for television.
That's right. There's been a lot going on today. Doral was a lot, but now we've added this extra Bill Barr party, which is amazing.
All right. I want to first start with, if I were at the Department of Education and I were putting a conference, it's my understanding that there would be a series of rules of who gets the RFP, request for proposal, and what groups you can use, what groups you can't use, your budget, and all this stuff. Does something like this exist for the West Wing?
Well, since this is Barr's, what he says is his personal holiday party. He's paying for it personally. This is his family party and friends. It's not a DOJ event. So, in this case, he can do whatever he wants. There's not a law against this. It's just, as you kind of alluded to, this is a guy who President Trump gave a huge plum prize, now giving President Trump back some money.
No, all right. But how about the G7? The president of the United States can say he wants it in Miami. But is there a duty that the government, since it's using taxpayer dollars, that they make this decision about what location in Miami to have this at?
Yes. Typically, the president will choose a site, and sometimes that site is limited to just, that it makes the decision for you. There's just one vendor. There's just one hotel. Sometimes they choose a city, and there's a lot of hotels, and they can bid. In this case, Trump is envisioning the city of Doral. Really, he means, though, his resort. When he talks about those villas, he wants to put everybody on the same property, which he owns.
Now, security-wise, that's always... Look, I know one time, I think it was St. Simon's Island we've used to host the G7. I think another time we used Camp David, by the way. I think the cheapest place to do it, that allows for plenty of privacy, is Camp David. You could do something like that. Is there any, so there really is no law. I mean, he can sort of do this. Again, I go back to the Department of Education. Could they just willy-nilly do it this way?
Probably not.
Okay. I mean, is it a GSA? I mean, is this Congress that's going to have to decide whether this is on the up and up?
It's a great question about Congress. So this is the State Department usually pays for these things. They pay for the U.S. officials who are staying there. They'll pay for sort of 15 rooms for the very top foreign leaders, and then the foreign countries have to pay for the rest of their staff. But typically, they're all in different hotels because they all want the same size presidential suite, and there aren't 8 presidential suites at one hotel. Typically, it's not just the choice of one place. In this case, Trump is choosing it. So there are some advantages to having everybody in one spot, but there's some disadvantages, too. You talked about how isolated usually the sites we choose are at Camp David, the island off the coast of Georgia. This is a place plopped down in the middle of industrial parks, homes, malls. It's urban Florida, and you're going to try to seal that off in the way that you sealed off an island.
Yeah, in defense, I know the area pretty well. In defense, if you're going to try to put this in the area, you probably can. It's going to be disruptive to traffic no matter what. It's probably, other than putting it on Key Biscayne and just shutting off Key Biscayne, I don't know where else you could do it in defense on that front. Let me go back to what Congress is doing, particularly when it comes to trying to investigate what he's doing on the hotel. Where is this on oversight, and what progress have they made?
They have not made much progress. To give you a sense of how little progress they've made, the most important, until now, until Doral, the most important sort of locus of emoluments questions for Trump was his D.C. hotel. That's where most foreign governments that spend money with him, they spend money there. And that building is actually owned by the U.S. taxpayer. Trump has a lease to operate a hotel in this building, but the taxpayer owns it, which puts it squarely in the jurisdiction of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. They own the hotel. They can investigate it. Even they have failed to learn the most basic facts. What countries have spent money with Trump at that hotel? How much did they spend? And we're hearing some unhappiness from Dina Titus, one of the congresswomen on that committee, who's the subcommittee chairman, saying, look, I think my committee chairman is playing too nice because he wants an infrastructure bill. He's not being nice. He's being too nice to the Trump people. Wow. We need to go harder. That may change coming into the fall, especially after this Doral decision, which kind of puts it out on the table that Trump intends to walk right over whatever the norms were before.
Do you feel like you have a sense? Do you feel like we have enough information to be able to at least ballpark figure out how much he's profited, how much Trump receipts have gone up than what they would have gone without him in the presidency?
No. We know it for individual properties, and there's a mix. So there's some places like Doral, the place he's considering for the G7 summit, have done quite poorly. Profitability's declined 70% there since 2015.
Well, he lost a signature golf tournament that basically was its marketing vehicle for vacationing. And so it's not surprising on that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And his name drove people away from Mar-a-Lago, which has lost revenue. His actions as president have driven away some of his sort of mainstream corporate clients. But then again, the D.C. hotel, which has attracted lots of foreign governments, Republicans, lobbying groups, people like T-Mobile who have something in front of the government, that hotel has seen revenue be really strong. So I don't have enough of the whole picture to tell you whether the Trump org as a whole is making money or losing money.
And do we have a sense of how much taxpayer money has gone to a Trump property? I mean, between the amount of Secret Service, Trump water, one of the nuggets was that he seemed to make over $100,000, I think, on his financial disclosure just from like selling water.
Right. We know that the U.S. government has spent a lot of money on this property. With the early days of 2017, each trip he took to Mar-a-Lago brought in at least $20,000 from the government buying Trump's own hotel rooms to put Trump's staff in. The problem is the government releases this data so slowly in response to Freedom of Information Act requests. We only really know what happened now in the first half of 2017. That's the most recent data we've gotten. So we know it's in the tens of thousands of dollars, probably a lot more than that. Because the government's so slow in giving it out, I don't really have an accurate picture of how big it is. He's made more than 150 visits to his properties. Every one of those brings some government people along.
David, you don't have to acknowledge this at all, but it does feel like you've done more work than Congress has to understand exactly how much money has been flowing in and out of the Trump organization based on the Trump presidency. David Fahrenthold from the Washington Post, thank you, sir. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.